Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Davies, and with me this morning is one of our new chicks. She's actually the smallest one we have, but she won't be for long. This is a Buff Orpington, which is a large chicken, and she doesn't have a name yet. So if you have any ideas, let me know. She's certainly the noisiest of all of our chickens. Okay, I'm going to give her back to our assistant. Okay. The book that I'm going to be reading to you is a wonderful book about bees. And even if you think you know a lot about bees, I found lots of information that I was unaware about. And so the book is wonderful. It's called The First Book of Bees by Albert Tibbetts. And this is the first of 3 readings I'm going to do. So I've broken the book up into 3 parts. And we're going to start the first part today. The First Book of Bees by Albert Tibbetts. Bees are always working. Almost any day in summer, you can find a bee buzzing around in a garden or field or orchard. If you stand still and don't strike at it, you will be able to look carefully and see what kind of bee it is. As a rule, bees only sting people who seem to be bothering them or interrupting their work. For bees are always working. Some kinds of bees work alone and live by themselves. Scientists call them solitary bees. Other kinds live in groups called colonies, and they work together. Many of the bees you are likely to see are honeybees, the kind that make the honey we eat. They live in colonies. The honeybees you most often see are beekeepers' honeybees that live in special boxes called hives, which have been set out for them. But there are others that are wild honeybees who live the year around in hollow trees or in old barns or in any safe, dry hole they can find. The wild honeybee colonies in this country were started when bees that people owned flew away from their hives and built colonies in the woods. Some honeybees are brown or black and some have yellow bodies, but no matter what they look like, honeybees all live together in the same way. They all raise their young bees alike. They all make the honey that tastes so good on bread or pancakes. They all make the wax that we often use in candles or to polish furniture. Of course, bees don't work for people on purpose. They make honey because it is their own food. They make wax to use in building their colonies. We are lucky that they often make more honey and wax than they can use. They will have much more than they need if the beekeeper who owns them helps them in various ways. This book will tell not only about honeybees and their unusually interesting lives, but also about the things a beekeeper does to make their work easier. Each bee helps. There are many jobs to be done in a honeybee colony: keeping the hive clean, laying eggs, taking care of the young, storing away food, and other chores. This work is divided between 2 different kinds of bees in each hive: the queen and the workers. The queen, here she is right here, lays the eggs. The workers do all the other tasks. The drones are a 3rd kind of bee in each hive. They are fat and lazy and do no work at all. Once a bee has grown into a worker, a queen, or a drone, it can never change. Each sort, even a lazy drone, is useful to a colony, which needs all 3 kinds in order to go on living. Later on in this book, you will find out more about how each one helps. Many chores for worker bees. But first, let's take a look at a worker bee. It does very special work of many kinds. It collects nectar, a sweet liquid from flowers, and changes it into honey that bees use for food. It gathers pollen, a fine powder found in flowers, and mixes it with nectar to make bee bread, which is food for young bees. It helps build a storage place for all this food. Worker bees are good housekeepers. They are nurses for the baby bees too. There are always many jobs around a hive. Worker bees have lots to do, and they couldn't possibly get all their work done without special tools to help them. But the only tools they have to work with are the ones that grow right on their own bodies. So this is a brood comb where the bee bread is stored as food to be used by the newly hatched bee larvae. Bodies with built-in tools. A bee's body is divided into 3 parts. In front is the head. This has the eyes. Honeybees have good eyesight. They can recognize all colors but red, which they can't tell from black. And they seem to be able to recognize objects around their hives. They have a good sense of direction so that they have no trouble in finding their own homes. On their heads, bees also have 2 short feelers, which are noses too. Bees have a keen sense of smell. A worker bee's head has a mouth with strong jaws for chewing and a long tongue with a spoon-like end. Around the tongue are parts somewhat like feelers. By using these and its tongue, a worker bee can make a tube to suck up nectar from flowers. A bee cannot cut the skins of fruit to suck the juices, but it can suck up juices from fruit already bruised and cut. The middle part of a bee's body has 4 thin, delicate wings, 2 on each side. A bee can move its wings very fast, as much as 400 times a second. And worker bees can fly very far, sometimes 8 miles in one flight. Each honeybee has 6 legs, 3 pairs, on its middle part. Worker bees' legs have all sorts of little brushes and other tools to help them. The hind part of a bee's body is the largest and has several of the worker bee's important tools. There is a honey sac or honey stomach, which is a sort of extra stomach where the bee stores the nectar it has sucked up with its tongue. Also in this hind section are some glands for making wax. This wax comes out of little slots on the underside of a bee. On the back tip of a bee is a sting, a sharp point connected to poison glands. This is a bee's weapon for protecting its colony from enemies. A worker bee uses its various tools to help it with its many, many jobs. Armed guards. During the busy summer season, worker bees live for about 6 weeks. They spend about the first 3 weeks of their lives as house bees, doing work inside the hives. When a honeybee that is working in fields or gardens flies home to its hive, it lands on a kind of porch before its front door, which is a crack that runs along one side at the bottom of the hive. At the door, it has to pass guards. These are young bees that are really armed. They have their stings for weapons. They know by smell the bees that belong to their own hive, and they stand there at the entrance ready to drive away any robber bees that may come from other colonies to steal honey. If the robbers don't fly off immediately, the guards sting them to death. The guards also watch out for mice and other invaders and sting them too if they try to sneak in. So here's the house bees cleaning the cells, and then this is the bee landing on their front porch area, and armed guards killing an invader. Okay, I'm just going to point out a few things. Bees obviously have these large compound eyes with their wonderful vision. Workers, drones, and queens all have 3 small or simple eyes on the tops of their heads. They are called ocelli or ocelli. The drones are the male bees of a colony. They are large, noisy fellows without any stings. Here's the worker bee who has the sting in the pollen baskets. This is the tongue of a bee with the spoon at the end and their antenna. The queen is a very important part of the bee colony. She doesn't live a life of leisure. She is always busy laying eggs. Here's the body of a worker bee with the antenna, the thorax, and the abdomen, the 3 parts of their segmented body. And here is the hind leg of a worker bee showing the pollen combs. All right, wax glands are located beneath the 8 scales that fit like shingles under the bee's abdomen. Air conditioners. Near the doorway of the hive are other bees that stand and make a humming sound, but not because they are angry. They make the noise with their wings, which they are fanning very fast, to do the work of air conditioners. Some stand on one side of the entrance facing in, and some stand on the other side facing out. Their fast fanning wings keep the air circulating. The moving air cools the hive in hot weather and keeps the honey from getting too soft and runny. It also helps dry some of the moisture out of the new honey that the bees are making. Housekeepers. Other bees are at work cleaning up the hive. They crawl over the floor and carry out dirt or dead bees in their jaws. There isn't a great deal of dirt for them to clean up because bees always take care of their toilet outside the hive. When the guards have killed a mouse inside the hive, the cleaners have been known to seal it up in wax and propolis, a kind of glue from plants, to keep their home neat and free of smells. A few bees do repair jobs around the hive. They use the propolis, which they gather from plants, to seal up any cracks in the outside walls where invaders might creep in or where the wind or rain could blow through. Bees are builders too. Some of the worker bees are building little six-sided wax cells in the hive. They are making what we call honeycomb, which is placed in 2 up and down layers built back to back. Bees use honeycomb for 2 different things. Some of the cells are cupboards for storing food. Others are little rooms for hatching and housing young bees until they are big enough to crawl around inside the hive. Inside their bodies, worker bees have special glands that change some of the honey they eat into wax for building honeycomb. A bee can change about 6 pounds of honey into 1 pound of wax. That just blows my mind. 6 pounds. When the liquid wax comes out of the 8 little openings on the underside of a bee's body and reaches the air, it hardens. These bits of hardened wax on a bee's abdomen look like fish scales, except they are much smaller, of course. They are flat and brittle, and if they were big enough, you could see through them, almost as if they were glass. Each worker removes her own wax scales by prying them loose with the spurs on one or the other of her hind legs. Then, while she stands on her middle legs, she passes the scales to her front legs, and her front legs pass them to her mouth. Now she chews the wax until it is soft enough to be pushed or pulled in to shape for building a cell. When the wax is ready, the bee carries it into her jaws, or she may even tuck it under her chin, where she keeps it in place with her forefeet. She takes it to some cell that is being built. There, another bee pinches off the wax with her jaws and pushes it into place on the cell wall. Always the same shape. Many bees work together on one cell, but the cells are always made exactly the same, in one or the other of 2 sizes, and they always have 6 sides. These sides fit together like pieces of a puzzle, so there is no space wasted. Square cells would fit together just as closely, but honeybees' cells are never square. Scientists have discovered that the 6-sided cells are stronger than the square cells would be. Born skillful. Bees didn't figure that 6-sided cells were best, nor did they gather together and think of all the other marvelous things they do. Bees, like other insects, can't think and plan ahead the way human beings can. They don't really have knowledge. What seems like knowledge of how to make honey or 6-sided cells is really instinct, a sense of how to do these things naturally without ever being taught. Bees are born with all their skills. They don't have to learn the complicated jobs they do. Honeycomb in rows. Wild bees build their own honeycomb, fitting it into the space where they live. But beekeepers have invented a way of making their bees build honeycomb in neat rows that can be lifted out and looked at now and then. Beekeepers have square wooden frames that they put into the hives, placing about 10 in a row with space between each frame for the bees to move around in. The frames have a wide piece at the top from which they hang, and the bees build their comb cells sideways across each frame, starting from sheets of wax called foundations. So here's the inner wall of the hive, the comb foundation, and then the bees will build this foundation out to a full comb. saving time and work. The reason for foundations is this. It takes a lot of honey and a lot of time for bees to make all the wax for their honeycomb, so beekeepers help them and give them a head start in building. They buy flat sheets of beeswax that have been stamped, so they are covered with little six-sided ridges to show the start of cells. These are the sheets called foundations, and they are like the foundations of buildings. The beekeeper fits them into the wooden frames that he puts in the hive, and the bees build comb from them. When bees build comb from foundations, they look as if they were having a tug of war. One bee hangs onto a ridge in the wax, another bee hangs onto the next ridge. Then one or more bees cling to each of these, and they all tug until the ridges have grown into walls on 6 sides. It is much quicker for the bees to build this way from a foundation than to make the whole of each cell out of the wax that they grow in their bodies. So they have time to gather more nectar and make more honey. Hives that grow taller. A beekeeper starts his hive with a ground floor called a brood chamber and a second story. When the second story is nearly full of honey in frames, he takes off the top of his hive, adds a third story, another box full of frames, and the bees move into that. The beekeeper keeps building up his hive with more stories all summer long, as the bees make more and more honey and need more and more space for storing it. The second story of a hive is called the food chamber, and that is where the bees keep most of the honey they use for their own food. The stories above the food chamber are called supers. All right, so that's it for today. Next week, we're going to read another section of the book. And thanks for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful week. Take care.